Hey, how's it going everybody? Welcome back to Aussie Fish Keeping. So in today's video, we're going to be talking all about detritus. And in particular, we're going to be talking how you can minimize and basically get rid of any detritus or mulm in your aquarium. So detritus can be super ugly looking, it can clog up your filters, and it can also cause ammonia spikes in your aquarium. So it's always best to try and restrict the amount of detritus or mulm that builds up in your aquarium. So yeah, for today's video, I've collected up 7 tips that can help you minimize the amount of detritus that you have in your aquarium. But I guess without any further ado, let's just jump straight into today's video. So before we do jump in today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about detritus and what it is. And I also will just quickly say, detritus isn't necessarily like a super bad thing to have in your aquarium. Obviously, like I said before, it can be ugly, it can clog your filters, and sometimes if you have large amounts of it, it can also cause ammonia spikes in your water. But besides that, it's relatively harmless and it doesn't really affect your fish too much if there's like a small amount of detritus or mulm in the water. So basically, if you don't know what detritus is, it's literally just a conglomeration of a bunch of different materials and substances that are in your water. So as for some of the materials that contribute to detritus buildup, there's 5 main materials, and that's fish waste, uneaten food, dead plant matter, organic debris, and algae residue. So basically, all of this stuff can settle to the bottom of your aquarium and it can sort of just like degrade a little bit, and it turns into this really brown sort of, I don't know, it kind of looks like mud, to be honest. And yeah, that sort of just settles in your substrate and in your filters, especially if you have a sponge filter. So you'll notice if you squeeze out a sponge filter or just mix up your substrate, a bunch of this muck will come into your water column, and that's basically detritus or mulm. So yeah, like I said, it's always best to try and remove this. Obviously, like I said, it's not really too bad for your fish, especially if you have good water quality and a good amount of beneficial bacteria in your aquarium. And a lot of the times you'll notice aquariums with a lot of mulm, so things like planted aquariums will usually have a lot of mulm in there, and that's usually hidden like underneath the plants or behind them and stuff like that. Even blackwater aquariums have a lot of mulm just because those botanicals break down and obviously contribute to the organic matter. But yeah, with that being said, let's just jump straight into the 7 ways you can actually prevent and minimize the amount of mulm in your aquarium. So first things first, we have trimming aquarium plants. So, I mean, obviously this only really applies if you have aquarium plants in your aquarium. That's kind of obvious. And if you don't have aquarium plants in your aquarium, then I'd probably just highly recommend getting aquarium plants anyway, but that's off topic. So basically, the dead aquarium plants do fall off. Even dead stems sometimes fall off, and they will break down and turn into detritus. So it's always best, if you see like a blackening or browning leaf, it's always best to trim it off and just get rid of it before it does turn into detritus. Or you can put things like snails in there that can just eat those leaves when they are damaged or dying anyway, and that will help you out a lot as well. But another reason you're going to want to trim your plants is because really big bushy aquarium plants can actually trap a lot of detritus. So I have a nice big bushy plant in my little 2-foot tank over there, and that traps so much detritus in it. Even things like Java moss and other mosses like that really do trap a lot of detritus. So over here, this big ball of algae, I guarantee there's a bunch of detritus underneath that. So yeah, it's always best to try and trim your plants. And even if you don't want to trim them, just like giving them a bit of a brush through just to get that detritus out from behind them is always good as well. So yeah, tip number 1 on our list is trimming your plants. Moving on to the next tip on our list. This is probably one of the most effective tips on this list, and it's probably one of my favorites as well. It's actually using Malaysian trumpet snails in your aquarium. So basically, if you don't know what Malaysian trumpet snails are, they're a little snail. They're kind of shaped like a cone. They look very similar to rabbit snails. And what they'll do is, if you have a nice big thick layer of substrate, they'll actually bury in that all day and they'll come out during the nighttime. And while they're in that substrate, they're obviously going to be constantly moving around and sifting through it, and that's actually going to push a lot of that detritus up into the water column, and that makes it a lot easier for your filters to suck up. And actually, if you do come out at nighttime when your lights are off in your aquarium, you will notice that your aquarium is actually kind of murky if you have these guys in there. And that is because they're all coming out of the substrate and they're kicking all that detritus into the water column. And one of the cool things about these guys, obviously they are like sort of considered a pest snail just because they can take over quite easily in the right environment. But a lot of the time you're not going to see them, and they really don't come out during the day, so yeah, you're literally just never going to see them. I barely ever see Malaysian trumpet snails in my 2-foot tank, but if I go in the substrate, there'll be literally thousands of them. And another super cool thing about these guys is they're actually a live bearing snail, so they do give birth to live young. I'm really not too sure how it works, to be honest. It's kind of crazy. There is another reason that you're going to want snails in your aquarium as well, but I'll leave that to a little bit later because it sort of goes with another tip. But as for tip 2 on our list, it's using Malaysian trumpet snails in your aquarium. Moving on to the third tip on our list, we have cleaning your filter. So filters can get trapped with all sorts of mold, debris, literally everything obviously that goes into your water column gets sucked up through your filter, so yeah, they do get very dirty. So cleaning your filter does help suck up a lot of that mold. So obviously there's going to be a lot of mold and detritus already in your filter. Once you clean your filter, it's able to clean your water a lot more effectively, obviously. So if you do notice a lot of detritus in your water, it may just mean you have to clean your filter a lot more often than you are. And a great thing to do if you notice a lot of really fine detritus is putting some filter wool in your filter. So that's obviously very easy if you have like a little power head filter or a canister filter, but sponge filters is definitely a lot harder. I think I have one time before just like zip tied a bunch of filter wool around my sponge filter, and that worked actually pretty well. But if you notice a lot of super fine detritus, I'd recommend just like going to Kmart and getting one of their little filters. They work pretty well for sucking out detritus out of your water. They've got, I think, 3 filter medias in it, so yeah, they're very cheap and very effective. So yeah, tip number 3 is cleaning your filter so that it's more effective at sucking up that detritus. Moving on to the next tip on our list, we have one that I feel like is a little bit obvious, but it's definitely by far the most effective way. It's putting flow in your aquarium. So flow could be from like an air stone, it could be from a power head, or it could be from a output of a filter. And it's definitely great to put flow like just above your substrate, not so it's kicking your substrate up, but so it's just brushing over your substrate, and that's gonna literally make it so that detritus can't settle. So any detritus that forms is just gonna be pumped straight back into your filter. The only problem with this though is it can be a little bit hard for your fish to swim around if there's constantly a lot of flow pushing throughout the aquarium, especially if you have bottom dwelling fish. But for the most part, like I said, even an air stone should be fine at just creating a little bit of flow in your aquarium, or even the Kmart filters, again, you can use those to make a little bit of flow in your aquarium. And the good thing about those two things is they're not super powerful like a power head or a filter output, and they're just going to be able to slightly brush over your substrate and just kick any small detritus up into the water column. But yeah, using flow in your aquarium is definitely another tip to minimizing detritus. Moving on to the next tip on our list. This one is by far the most obvious, and I really didn't want to put it on today's list, but I sort of had to, and that's doing consistent water changes. So when you do your consistent water changes, you can either use like a gravel vac, or you can just get your siphon. And what I like to do is I might pop up a video, I hold my siphon, get my finger, and I sort of just swirl the substrate, and that kicks the detritus up into the water, and the siphon just sucks it straight up. It's a pretty super simple method, and it works super well at collecting any detritus out of your substrate. But also you will notice layers of detritus collecting on the surface of your substrate, and you can just quite easily get your siphon and sort of suck those up without sucking up too much of your substrate. And it's definitely a lot easier to remove detritus in like a gravel bottom aquarium, just because you can use a gravel vac. Whereas in sand, it can be a little bit more difficult to use a gravel vac, and most of the time you do have to do the little finger method. So yeah, doing water changes is, I mean, a pretty self-explanatory one, but it's definitely another great tip to removing detritus from your water. Moving on to the next tip on our list, we have controlling your feeding. So like I mentioned at the beginning, leftover food can contribute to detritus buildup, and overfeeding does put more leftover food in your aquarium. So basically, the rule of thumb is you should try and feed your fish as much as they can eat within 5 minutes, and anything they don't eat, you should suck out with a siphon. But this is once again when the Malaysian trumpet snails and practically any other snail comes in handy, because they will actually eat any leftover food that's fallen to the bottom of your aquarium, which basically doesn't give it any time to form into detritus in the first place. So yeah, controlling your fish feeding is definitely another super important tip when wanting to minimize your detritus. And then as for the final tip on our list, this one sort of goes hand in hand with the Malaysian trumpet snails, but we have stocking your aquarium with bottom dwelling fish. So bottom dwelling fish could be things like crebensis, Bolivian butterfly rams, any sort of like apisto, golden eye cichlids, ram cichlids. It can also be any sort of pleco, bristlenose, corydoras catfish, basically any sort of catfish, cherry shrimp, spiny eels, any sort of loach. There's literally so many different types of little bottom dwelling aquarium fish out there, and all of them play a super important role when wanting to minimize detritus. So things like bristlenose and cories, they'll actually brush over the surface of your substrate and they'll sort of kick the surface up, which makes it a lot easier for your filter to suck up that detritus. And cories will actually also dig in the substrate a little bit and kick any of that detritus in the substrate out. And you can obviously get things like spiny eels, which will completely dig throughout the substrate, and they're super beneficial at kicking the detritus into your water column. And another thing most of these bottom dwelling fish will do is they'll actually also eat any of that leftover food that your other aquarium fish don't eat. Although in saying that, I will quickly mention you do definitely need to feed these bottom dwelling fish. They're not just going to thrive off like eating leftover food. Most of them do need their own specialized diet, and you can't really just throw them in there and forget about them. Although they can be super beneficial for your detritus, you definitely still need to take care of them as well. So my favorite bottom dwelling fish to minimize detritus is definitely cories. They're super cool little catfish. They're super energetic, super active. They add a little bit of spice to your aquarium, and they're super beneficial at eating any of that leftover food and kicking up that detritus. But yeah, with that being said, another great tip for minimizing detritus in your aquarium is using bottom dwelling aquarium fish. So that is actually going to bring us to the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope this video helped a lot of you guys out. Again, it's not really that big of a deal, although it definitely can become problematic if it builds up in your aquarium over time. And also it can just look a little bit disgusting, if I'm being honest. So I always like to minimize the amount of detritus I have. But yeah, if you did enjoy today's video, make sure to go down and subscribe, and while you're down there, smash the like button and comment your thoughts on today's video. I always love going down there and reading them all, and I reply back to every comment I get. Also, if you haven't done so already, please make sure to go down, click the link in my description, and go check out my website. I've got a bunch of rare guppy strains up there. I've also got some Malaysian trumpet snails which you can use for your detritus management. I've got some bristlenose, and we're about to release some apistogramma orange flash pairs as well. So yeah, we've got some super great quality fish on there at the moment, and they're by far the cheapest in Australia. So yeah, I'll leave the link to that in the description. But yeah, with that being said, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in that next video.